Hi, everyone, and welcome to AMAKA Tuesday, which is the third and final day of AMAKA's Our World Festival. For those of you who joined Self-Care Sunday and Motivation Monday, welcome back. And for those of you who are just joining us today, welcome to AMAKA Tuesday, dedicated to nourishing the mind, body, and soul. With intimate conversations around mental health and sexual wellness, we discuss social issues that really matter to us in our community. My name is Nataleja Whaley, and I'm a culture journalist based in Brooklyn, New York. And on behalf of AMAKA, we are so delighted that people are able to join this session today. Today's summit official hashtag is Our World Festival. That's hashtag Our World Festival. Also feel free to tag at amaka.studio in any social posts throughout the panel and the summit as a whole. In order to enter our second giveaway, we are giving away an iPad and products from Black and African-owned brands. This summit is brought to you today by Vista Bank. And as we get into the session, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my experiences with mental health and then introduce each of our wonderful panelists. Once again, I'm Nataleja Whaley, a culture journalist based in New York, covering music and social issues. In 2020, I spoke openly in the New York Times about the greater need for mental health support for Black journalists covering trauma within their communities. As a result of experiencing mental health challenges during the pandemic and not finding adequate information, I was inspired to create Black Mind Gut, a personal storytelling blog about my mental health experiences that will be launching later this year. And now I am pleased to introduce this fellow speakers today. First, we have Naj Austin. Naj Austin is the founder and CEO of Ethel's Club, a social and wellness space designed for people of color. Ethel's Club provides a community created for intention, healing, and creation. She is also the founder and CEO of Somewhere Good, a social platform designed for people of color to connect around the things we love. Welcome, Naj. We also have today Ruthie Zarai. Ruthie Zarai is an Ethiopian and Eritrean writer, digital media expert, podcast host, and self-development coach focused on wellness and self-leadership coaching. Ruthie is also the founder of Eri Wellbeing, a wellness community for people of color. Thank you for joining us, Ruthie. And also we have Hawa Ojefu. Hawa is a Nigerian sexual violence and mental health activist. She is known to be the first Nigerian female to have received a Queen's Young Leader Award for her work. As the executive director of the Mental Health Initiative, She Writes Women, Hawa leads the team in creating space and amplifying the voices of persons with mental health conditions, empowering them to co-create their solutions, tell their own stories, and advocate for their own rights. Welcome, Hawa. And we also have Aliyah Moro. Aliyah Moro is an Egyptian-born freelance journalist and author of the best-selling nonfiction book, The Greater Freedom: Life as a Middle Eastern Woman Outside the Stereotypes. Moro sought to give voice to the Middle Eastern women who, like her, don't fit the mold through her book, as she led countless interviews, meticulous research, and relied on her own unique experiences. And I would love for you all to say where you all are calling in from today.
So I'm calling in from Stockholm.
I'm from London.
I'm calling in from Brooklyn.
I'm calling in from Abuja, Nigeria.
Great. Welcome you all. It's great to be here with you all today, and I look forward to this conversation that should feel like something that's laid back, and hopefully will give everyone some resources that they can take with them around mental health. So the first question we're going to get into today is about identities. And many of us here have lived through or are living through multiple identities. How can one deal with the fragmentation that may come about as children of immigrants or as immigrants, and not necessarily fitting into one place in your experiences. So has anyone want to chime in on that to start off?
I have a lot of things to say about that. So I was born in Egypt and I've lived in London more or less since I was 8 years old. So feeling sort of both and neither is ultimately what actually made me want to write my book, because I felt very much like I was getting two sort of messages, from the two different cultures and the two different societies that I belong to, in terms of like who I should be and what my life should look like. And, also dealing with the sort of stereotypes around all of that as well. I definitely felt kind of torn between the two, and I still do. And a lot of my work and a lot of my kind of personal journey is figuring out what I believe and, what my kind of moral compass is and what my place in the world is outside of what the two sometimes opposing cultures tell me it should be.
I completely relate to that. I was born here in Sweden. My parents emigrated from Eritrea because of war. So that's like a shadow that's lived over my entire experience. And that duality that Alia was speaking to, of like not really fitting in completely to like in one space, trying to navigate the different kind of ideals around conservatism and liberalism, and like it can just be a lot. And for me, I definitely think that it's been part of my mental health journey as well. Like I got to this point where I crashed and burned, and I was just like, no, I actually need to find a way to create myself, like outside of this. What do I think? What do I believe in? What makes sense for me in this stage of my life? And that can be painful sometimes, but I feel that then that's also a lot of the work that we do in Airy Wellbeing, which is this community that I co-founded with my great friend Mikael, is around like, how can we own like our stories from here and now, and finding a way to like, keep what works and let go of what doesn't work anymore. But and I feel like that is probably like lifelong work of not feeling like you'll truly belong fully in one place, but always like navigating these dualities and also trying to like create yourself.
Wow. Does anyone else have thoughts around that topic or experiences they want to share? Okay. And so if you could speak more on dual identity in the sense of career, relationships, or even picking a partner, how does that, because we know for ourselves, we have to define who we are through these experiences, but then how does that work in relation to other people when we're showing up at work and when we're dating, when we're, just in different social spaces? How has that been a challenge, or how have you overcome those challenges, if any?
I feel for me the most way that I've felt that, especially recently, is in terms of dating, because there are very sort of concrete ideas of who I'm supposed to, I'm not really meant to be dating at all, but that aside, there are all these kind of ideas of who I'm supposed to be with. And that's supposed to be someone, from a similar culture, from a similar religion, or the same religion, even if it's not one that I necessarily practice or that my parents necessarily, are super strong about. So that's been difficult. And I think it's something that we take for granted when we live in these multicultural societies, that you could just date whoever and you can be with whoever you want. And, that's how it should be. So it's quite difficult to sort of have this checklist that you grow up knowing what it is, but it's not necessarily your checklist. And then kind of figuring out what is on your checklist and what doesn't belong there is something that I'm still really struggling with.
I just say, like, for me, when it comes to work, I think I've just dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome, as I think, as a Black woman, but I'm sure this is for anyone that just feels different, and feeling like, and often being the only person in the room, that is like black or brown, and I think that what's been really distinctive from my experience is that you have to leave so much of yourself out sometimes in these spaces. And I mean, like, I've mostly worked in very white corporate spaces, right? Where you leave a lot of yourself out to just, fit in and kind of like make it work. And I think what we've seen in the last year with like Black Lives Matter, finally we're having like a larger conversation around this where we're actually able to talk about our trauma and try to bring it into the workplace. But often it's felt like very split. You come into work, there's a delivery, but really a lot of yourself and your cultural identity and this like dynamic that we're talking about, you kind of like leave it outside, which I think for sure definitely like affects our mental health. And I think for me, the way that I've overcome that is just by having more of these type of conversations in community with other people. I think that's really where I found like exactly what we're doing today, kind of like my safe space.
I'd like to add on to that. A lot of the duality that we've spoken about for me personally has appeared in the career sort of sector. I echo everything that Ruthie just shared in terms of having to show up to spaces where you feel like you can't fully come as yourself. And my response was to flee. I left to create my own company because I wanted to work and be able to celebrate my Blackness and allow for other people to celebrate their cultural identity and who they were and all the ways that that means. It's definitely different. We actually had a conversation at work the other day around how much AAVE is used in our work environment, and it is a very Black and African-centered space. And so when I go into meetings and I am the only Black woman, I'm always like, this is kind of weird because I spend so much of my time with other Black people and people of color. And so I think, everyone has their sort of own journey as to how they sit with that. And again, I think it's something that I think Ruthie mentioned earlier around, I don't think there is ever a solution or an end goal as to where one ends up in this sort of perfect world. But I do think it's something I've chased for a while. And I think it has helped my mental health to be in spaces where I could just be myself and not be sort of, the token Black woman at the table.
And to piggyback off of that, when we're going through these issues in the real world, we tend to depend, especially on our friendships and our peer groups, because they're more likely to be going through, those similar experiences. And so tell me about if any of you have experiences where you have connections with communities or socially, where you're able to sort of be able to let your guard down and talk about what's happening with you. How important is it to have sort of that community to fall back on amongst your peers?
I think I would just jump in here because, part of the work that we do at my organization, She Rights Women, has really been built on the foundation of community. And that's particularly as, people with lived experience of mental health conditions. And, broadly speaking, just the fact that mental health is still very much a taboo topic in many spaces, and the degree to which we talk about it varies in different spaces as well. So it's really, really helpful. For what we have done since 2016 was always having the support groups and these, communities where people like myself and people like other people as well can come to spaces where they feel safe enough to drop their guard. And, even if it's like once a month, time, it is a lot easier to be able to say, oh, finally, I'm going to come here and then let you guys know what's really going on. So this is the kind of space where when somebody says, how are you? You don't just say, fine, I'm okay. Everything that is correct outside there, you sigh and you're like, girl, it's been a month, and then you can then begin to rant, and then people hold space for you. Because who are we really kidding when we say, oh, I'm fine, I'm good? Not really. And it's really interesting because for me it has been a huge part of my own healing and recovery, just being able to come into spaces where I feel like I can be seen completely, and I don't have to edit myself, I don't have to hold back myself, I can tell you exactly what I feel. But more importantly, that the people in that environment, while I'm speaking, and it's happened right here on this call, and people are nodding, and it gives you that sense of, oh my gosh, it's not just me, and if people are nodding, people are saying yes, and people are saying me too. And it's so powerful, because I feel like whenever we talk about mental health and whenever we talk about the system and recovery, we totally neglect the power of that social construct, the social environment, and how powerful it is for our well-being, our connection, our belonging, which are very, very important aspects of our well-being. So for me particularly, it has been one of the best parts of my 5 years, just being able to belong in this community that sees me and accepts me wholly and completely.
That's amazing.
I just want to add something about like everything that Hawa just said. For me, when I started my healing journey, which was after experiencing burnout like 5 years ago, right? I hit the wall and I was like, oh my gosh, I really need to like actually feel my feelings and like allow myself to catch up with myself, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. But when I went on that journey in terms of building community and where do I feel safe, it took me a while to seek help from practitioners, but I was specifically seeking help from practitioners that could understand my experience. So here in Sweden, there aren't many Black therapists, at least not at that time. But I grew up in a community that was very mixed. So my friends are like just children of immigrants, really from all over the world. And we really relate on so many levels. So the therapist that I chose, she was of Iranian background, and she was also a daughter of immigrants, right? And then the life coach that I chose to work with, she was also a daughter of immigrants and of Jamaican descent. So like just seeking out practitioners and people that can understand you and relate to your experience. And that's a way of building community in a very kind of intimate space, in an intimate way. But that was really important to me, because I was like, if I'm going to open up and really like share, I need somebody to understand my trauma and like my story, right? And then that worked for me when I was able to heal some of those parts. And it's an ongoing healing. It's not like I've arrived at a place, but I feel like I can speak to some of these things from a place of neutrality. That led to me co-founding Every Wellbeing, which is just a community platform where we're just like, hey, you're not on your own. We interview people from the community, we normalize mental health, and the response that we've gotten is just amazing, because there's so many people just suffering in silos, in different pockets. And I think there's an added layer that's unlocked when you see people like you that come from the same background, grew up in the same conservative culture, that are like talking openly about some of these experiences. So for me, I think it's fundamental to be able to be in community with people that can relate to your experience.
I, again, agree with everything that's been stated. The one thing I want to add for myself is that when I was running away from and or fleeing white corporate America, I think I was running towards community and trying to figure out what that meant for me. That is how Ethel's Club was born, but it was really this feeling of, I want to be in a space, in a physical space, and this is pre-COVID, obviously. I want to be in a physical space where I can feel unburdened, where I can feel connected with other people, and sort of have that initial top layer when you're connecting with folks in sort of regular public spaces where you don't have to sort of know, like, can I be safe here? Can I say the thing? Can I be vulnerable? Where, again, like Hawa mentioned, when Ethel's Club was opened, we have a space here in Brooklyn, New York. When people would walk in, you would physically see a response in their shoulders dropping of just feeling like, I just feel more at ease. I maybe can't articulate that, and it maybe isn't something that I can, explain, but my body feels calmer. And I think that is such a hugely important factor in terms of mental health, in terms of healing, in terms of starting whatever journey that one may need to go on, to have that support system around you that is either co-signing, supporting, nodding their head, really just being there and being able to see it. And not have it just be digital, I think is really magical. And I think this past year has been really hard for a lot of reasons. But I think that has been a huge component. We've grown Ethel's Club digitally through the pandemic, but that essence of being able to walk into a space and know that it was built for you, designed by people who have similar experiences to the experiences that you've had, there's nothing like it. And, I think for folks who are looking to start a mental health journey, a wellness journey, a journey of self-reflection, I always urge folks to look for other people at the same time that they're looking for practitioners, because I think it's helpful in its own way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I feel like, you know, I always say it's easier to be yourself if you can see yourself. And I feel like, you know, social media has just made it so easy to sort of find people who are like-minded and to find communities. And, you know, there's something really, really powerful in finding people who, you know, feel the same things or who have gone through the same things. And I think that also, as both of you mentioned, stems as well to therapy. So I'm like a big advocate for therapy, and I've been to quite a few different therapists over the years. And the last time I went was like a couple of years ago, and I remember she was a white therapist, and I just felt like I had to spend so much of the session like explaining and being like, well, I know that you think that you have this assumption because of where I'm from, that, you know, whatever. And I have to kind of debunk all of that before I can even get into what I actually want to talk about. And I came across this website last year called Culture Minds, and it's all therapists of color. And I was so excited, and I started therapy with a brown therapist, and it was just so nice because I just felt like she automatically understood where I was coming from, and she sort of understood the cultural nuances, and it just made me feel so seen, as opposed to kind of having to validate my experience or sort of explain the whole backstory as to this one thing that I want to talk about today. So yeah, I think finding a community and having people that you can relate to is life-changing.
Great. You know, we all echo the importance of having people like you around you, and who have gone through similar experiences as you. Like me personally, I had some really chronic anxiety over the pandemic, and it was really hard for me to find not just other Black people, but also people who were specifically going through the type of anxiety that I was experiencing. And I started to share my story. And what was interesting was so many people would DM me or send me texts and say, hey, like, I go through that too. Like, I've had panic attacks or anxiety attacks as well. And I think it's so important sometimes to, when you have the community, sometimes you don't lean on it. And I'm one of those people that sometimes I can just keep going and say, I got it, I'm okay. But like also just tapping in and saying, you know what, I'm going to show up for that therapy session or that group session or go to that event, even though I may not feel all the way there to go. Like, because sometimes that's the day that you really do need to go and tap into those resources. So I just wanted to add, like, for everyone who, you may have that community, but you don't really always tap into it. Sometimes you have to push yourself a little bit to do so, because the benefit in the long run, there's just a relief that comes when you hear other people say, me too, or I'm listening and I see you. So that's
Talisha, can I add on to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I very much agree. And I think the other magical part that I've discovered over the last year is that when you do have that community and you're seeking maybe something specific, the other side of that is these people can also sort of share that cultural competency across other things you haven't thought of. And I'll give you an example. I was looking for a Black business coach, and I found one, and she's amazing. And that same person was like, oh, I also have a Black doctor. And I'm like, tell me more. And so now my entire life is a world in which I don't have to explain that I'm feeling down that day because of a horror that has occurred. It is just understood. And I think that there is so much freedom in being able to live one's life and not have to articulate ourselves through it and or educate ourselves or educate other people about our existence through it. And that's what community has really done for me. I think that, midway through the pandemic, I was like, I'm going to redecorate my house. And so I have a long list of Black and POC and African-owned brands and companies that I now live among. So I think there's also magic, not only in that first initial moment of feeling connected and seen and heard, but also how much more that community can offer you.
And I think also, Sorry to just jump in.
Mhm.
I think also the impact that you know it's so positive for us as like someone who's sharing or whatever, and you're like, oh my god, yeah, someone relates. But I feel like it's also just so powerful for other people as well. You know, like for them to, you know, even sort of writing my book, and I was so nervous because it's really personal, and there's a lot of things that I write about that you're not meant to talk about. And it was so nice to kind of see the response, and even, you know, people like my mom, who I had been particularly worried of her response, and she was sort of like, oh well, you know, you've actually articulated loads of things that I've felt but didn't sort of feel like I even had the space or the kind of ability to really start to even grapple with. So I think, you know, it's so difficult sometimes to be the one to talk or to be honest or to ask for help or to be open about our vulnerabilities. But in doing that, it also empowers so many other people to be honest as well. And then that's a domino effect. And then that just keeps going.
I completely agree with that. When we started Every Wellbeing, we were really thinking about like, how do we ignite a conversation in the community that people will actually lean into? And we decided we have to start with our own stories. We can't expect openness from other people if we're not sharing our own stories. And exactly like you said, Alia, I started with my personal story, and I felt like naked in front of people sharing that on Instagram. I shared stuff that I hadn't even shared with my family, like experiences with like anxiety and like depression. I'd never talked about it, but I was like, okay, we're experiencing so many suicides within our community, right? Nobody's talking about it. We need to address it. So we started with like, I started with my story. My co-founder, Mikkel, shared her story. And then we crowdsourced a lot of stories, and we got so many testimonials, you know, and that just like leveled it. It created this openness where people were just really leaning in. And I think exactly to what you're saying, like sharing our stories is actually really, really important. As uncomfortable as it can be, it just creates, yeah, like a better foundation for us to actually be able to level and to talk and be vulnerable, which, you know, let's be honest, it's hard coming from like the backgrounds that we come from. It can be hard sometimes to make so much space for our feelings and be vulnerable. So I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, just adding on top of what Ruthie is saying, and just your last comment with regards to, I mean, first off, being that we have to first show that example with our own stories, because vulnerability is hard, right? You know, like you rightly said, you feel naked. It's you're exposing parts of yourself that even maybe you haven't even said out loud to yourself, not to even talk about people within your immediate space. And then now you have to share with all these people. But it's really how it works with vulnerability and trust. It has to go hand in hand. You know, in order for me to really trust that, you know, you can hold space for me, it's like you have to give me something, you know, and we all have to give some things for everybody to feel like, okay, I think that's okay. I think we have something here that we can all hold on to. I got your secrets now. Type thing. But I think it's also, you know, on the point that Ruthie made before with regards to even seeking practitioners, I think one thing that about my own journey that I have seen is not just being, you know, a person with lived experience, but also being on the other side of the table as a professional as well, where people seek out like, okay, well, I'm looking for a practitioner that has lived experience, because I feel like you bring a different perspective to the table, you know. And I found it so interesting in my own journey because, you know, I had a team, I had a psychiatrist and psychologist and all of that, but people would come and they'll be like, I kind of thought you were going to be the one that I was going to see. And I'm like, oh, you know, there are other, you know, and you're like, no, I feel like I need a practitioner with lived experience, because I feel like there are layers to it, and you would get me beyond the textbook. And it was really hard for me to grapple at some point. But then I realized that, okay, it does make sense. You know, there are differences that, you know, having lived experience can really position you in a certain type of headspace that perhaps when someone says certain things, you don't, you know, you stop for a couple of seconds to really take that in because you're familiar with what that is. And perhaps that could even enrich the process of recovery for that person as well. So I really just wanted to touch on how, you know, differently it even presents in, you know, either being the person who is seeking support and being the person who is being, whose support is being sought from as well.
Great. And to talk about, you know, knowing when you are in a safe space versus a toxic space, because being vulnerable, like you said, Aloha, it takes a lot of vulnerability, but it also takes trust. And maybe not every person we open up to is the best person to open up to, even on social media. You know, sometimes I'm like, do I want to say this out loud, or do I just want to put this in my journal today? You know, there's always this back and forth sometimes in my mind. And so how do you know if, you know, the friendships and the, you know, the people that you're dealing with on a more personal level, even family, how do you know when you're in a safe versus toxic uh, relationship, and how are you able to sort of navigate that or set boundaries in those situations?
Yeah, I think it's something that I'm trying at the moment to get better at. I feel like a big part of it actually is having boundaries. So that was the word that was kind of circulating in my head until you said it. And it's something that I'm only just starting to understand the importance of, because I think, you know, for most of my life, up until probably this year, I was very much just like, yeah, whatever you need. Okay, are you happy? Are you okay? Like, kind of, and not really thinking about myself. And, you know, even with my family, I would be very sort of oversharing, and then sometimes maybe I'd see something that would trigger them, and then they would sort of respond in a way that was unhelpful. So it's kind of also, I think, understanding where you are in your journey and why you're sharing something. Like, what is it that you need to get? Because I remember when I started therapy initially, I would go to my mom and I'd be like, my therapist said all of these things, and, you know, a lot of it was about her, and so she's sort of getting upset and triggered, and then I'm like, oh, you don't understand anything, and then I'm like extra upset when I speak to my therapist the next time. And it kind of was a little bit of a journey to sort of understand, like, actually, when I'm still working through things, that's not the time to share, because then I'm going to be really sensitive to whatever reaction or response I get. And that's not fair to, like, put on other people as well. So it's kind of, yeah, I think figuring out when it's healthy and helpful for you to share, and when it's the right time to do that, which I think comes a bit with boundaries as well, to be honest.
I very much agree. And I don't think I have an answer either. But what I've been sort of, where I've been operating has been around this feeling of understood truths. And so having what I call sticky conversations, which can really be very general in a lot of ways, in a place where I feel like there is an understanding of both people are showing up with good intent. And that does not always happen in most situations, including with my family, including with my close friends, including with people I work with, and, you know, I can keep going. And I think coming in with that perspective has allowed me to have either not the conversation that I would have had prior, and or a better conversation, because we're both coming at it from a good perspective. And it kind of falls in line with that feeling of boundaries, of, you know, my boundary to talk about this is this big, and that's all I can offer. And anything outside of that, I'm going to feel either uncomfortable and or upset. And then, you know, that's going to reflect back to you, and you're going to feel uncomfortable and upset. And now the conversation has spiraled, and now we're screaming. And so that was my growing up. And so as an adult, I've worked a lot to figure out, how do I have the most, not even positive conversation, but one in which we both feel like no one is setting out to hurt the feelings of the other person, which I think can often tends to happen. And I'll speak really quickly to how we're figuring this out in a work setting. A lot of what we're thinking about as we grow our team is how we scale and grow a company that is strong, and one in which people feel connected and aligned with one another. And so one of the new tools we have is a word book, where basically we have a bunch of different words like safety, harm, etc. And the team collectively defines what those things mean to them. So when we come to one another, we understand where each person is coming from, and there isn't this sort of buy-in to a definition that we maybe don't agree with. And I think it's active, right? It can't be passive. It has to be something we're kind of constantly working towards. And I think that's the other thing that people sort of feel is like, okay, now that I have this agreed upon truth with you, that's just what it is now. But we're all sort of growing and becoming different people. And so also stepping into the fact that what we've agreed upon today may change in the future, and that's also okay. But again, it's all active. I'm learning every day. I'm like, I figured out a new way to talk to my mother. This is ring the bell, because it's complex and it's emotional.
Yes, to everything that's been, oh, sorry. I just had a quick thought on to everything that's been said by both Alia and Naj. And for me, I think, like Alia said, a lot of my stuff has come from people pleasing, lack of boundaries. I think it's partly cultural, it's partly like gendered, there's a lot that really is like kind of baked into that. It took me a really long time to understand that I get to actually have boundaries and that it's okay and I'm not rejecting other people. But I feel like my mental health has been intrinsically tied to that, my ability to actually say, hey, these are my boundaries. And initially, if I think you go on a journey, right? I went on a journey of like isolating myself, right? Because I was just like, oh, the world is just too much. There's too much expectations. My parents are too intense, like all of that stuff. And then you're like, hey, I've got to actually like live in the world, right? So, and then my boundaries became very kind of like pushing against other people. And now I'm in a space where like, hey, boundaries are actually neutral. My boundaries are neutral. I'm not trying to teach you about how you're supposed to be. I just want to be treated this way. I want to feel this way, right? So I think it's like an evolution, and it's important for us to be kind to ourselves, because I really come from I think about like a group collectivist culture. There aren't no boundaries. Like back home, we all live together. You live with your parents until you get married. There's no like the notion of boundaries is just like very, very loose, right? So then I've got to like fast forward to where I am today, like living in this Western society where it's like actually really important and imperative to my mental health that I do have boundaries. But I just think it's important for us to like go easy with it. And where I am now, and it's been like such a journey, is that first of all, I started to, when you asked the question, I started thinking about Brene Brown, where she says like, not everybody deserves to hear your story, right? Not everybody gets to hold space for you. You get to distinguish like what feels safe to you. And for me, it's gone from it being an intellectual thing to more of a felt embodied thing. Like what triggers my nervous system? Why is this triggering me? And like, I've actually started to connect with myself more, where I can like really genuinely feel energetically when I feel unsafe. And I'm learning how to trust that feeling as well. So that's just an encouragement to all of us to say that inherently we know, when we feel safe and unsafe. It's just that we've, haven't built that relationship with that inner knowing. And it's like there's an opportunity for us to come back to that, to actually listen to all of the signs in our body.
Yeah, and I think, very amazing perspectives. I just want to touch on just a little bit with what everyone has said. Nat spoke about the workplace, and it's just something that for us, and I love the fact that you said, what may be our truth today, is constantly evolving, and it might change tomorrow, and that's the process of growth. So we can't just say, oh, this is going to be it, and then everybody rolls with it for in perpetuity. It's not particularly. It doesn't give room for change and growth. So for us, it's really at the core of everything that we do at She Writes Woman is really psychological safety. And, it's a term that I picked up over the years from, I believe, the Fearless organization, the book. And it has really resonated, not just within the workplace, but even transcended the workplace. This ideology, this idea that, you can bring your full self inside here without having to deal with, the negative consequences, of bringing your full self here. But even in bringing your full self here, these are the boundaries of work, of what work is and what work isn't. And then we are able to co-create what safety looks like for all of us individually and collectively. So in the workplace, it's always that learning process, because what works for me and the team today, with one person just leaving the team and another person coming in, we have to then go back to see what aligns again with the team and see how to move forward with that. So it's an active process. And I can understand many workplaces that just like, forget that part, because it requires you to actually pay attention. It requires you to actually be invested in people's well-being beyond just their deliverables and the bottom line. It really requires you to be vested in that way. But for me, when it comes to other, aspects of safety, one of the things that has definitely helped me is in thinking about it as, maybe there aren't toxic people, maybe they're just toxic environments and toxic traits and toxic behaviors. And a lot of times what I have come to realize is that a lot of people who make us unsafe have been people who are acting out their own traumas over time, because they've been taught that this is exactly what things should be, this is how you approach things. And so there's that bit of rigidity there that doesn't give room for other people to feel like they can breathe and live out loud. So it always feels like a choking environment, because it doesn't work for me, because I don't feel expressive, because I don't feel heard in this environment. And so a lot of times we would find it across the African continent that a lot of homes and families actually have this, and we call it, our culture, or this is a tradition, but it's really trauma, decontextualized. Really, it is trauma that is in motion within our families, and we've called it our culture, and this is how it is. This is a tradition. And then the one person that decides that, what, I can't take this, of course, now becomes the rebel in the family. And it's like, now you have to deal with everything. And from the laughter, I can tell that perhaps we have a couple of rebels here as well. And of course, I am as well. But it's really, it now becomes, the onus now comes in you to be able to now create what a safe environment is for you. And it's really tough, because now you're having to undo, years and years of conditioning. Like, I've been taught to do this. And now it's not just that you're undoing it, but you have to deal with the guilt of it. Like, okay, now that I'm setting a boundary, isn't that me like detaching myself from my family? But it's my family. Shouldn't I be closer to them? Shouldn't I let them? Oh no, but this is my boundary. But I really want to be safe. And it's like that internal turmoil keeps going on and on and on and on. So it helps me sometimes to detach the traits from the people, so that hopefully I can still love the people, but understand that the behaviors do not necessarily, work for me. And I can decide that while I love you, I have to love you from a distance. I have to step back a little bit, because this is what is important for my own well-being. And I've seen that happen, in my life, with regards to family and moving away and living alone. People will call it acts of rebellion. But really, it's okay if you call it rebellion, because at some point you have to really put yourself first to be able to really deal with other people as well. So it's really helpful to realize that a lot of times when we talk about trauma and we're addressing mental health issues, it's really not just only on an individual level, it's also on a communal level as well. Because when you don't address these issues, they become culture, and before you know it, you're passing down generational trauma, on and on and on. And then, only a few people may actually have the courage and the stamina and the grit to be able to fight back, to say, what, I don't feel like this is, I don't feel inside my body when it comes to this. I want to come back into myself.
Oh my God, I love that so much. I particularly love what you said, that this is not culture. Like, it becomes culture, but it doesn't need to be. And that's something I think about all the time. Like, what even is culture? It's just things that people have decided and have just kept passing down. And you're like, no, you can't break out of that, because this is how things are, But just because things have always been like that, it doesn't mean that it's the right way to be, and it doesn't mean that it should continue to be like that. So I just love all of that so much. And I think what's really difficult is sort of managing your mental health and sort of managing your own personal well-being while doing that work, because there is a lot of guilt that comes with that. And I think there's a lot of grieving. There's a lot of grieving the person that you are supposed to be. There's a lot of grieving the sort of relationships that you have when, they don't go the way that they're supposed to go because you're speaking out about things. So there's a lot of grief, I think, that comes with stepping outside of that, but it's important work. And I just love what you said.
Thank you so much. And I think you just gave me a word that I've been looking for over the last about a month and a half or so. Yeah, I've also been in that space where I'm really trying to figure out that relationship between where I feel like, trauma and, it arouses my entire pain body and everything. And, I think it's really grieving because I keep thinking about the person I could have been, the relationship that could have been, and that sense of loss. Like, so you mean if I stay and choose what is for myself, then I have to let go of the fact that this relationship could be like that. And it's such an excruciating place to be. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that one of my reflections has been as a daughter of immigrants. I was born here, right? I know back home we used to go a lot as children, but really when I started going back more as a young adult, I realized that the programming that my parents were trying to teach me was so outdated too. So a lot of us are walking around with expectations of what our parents, they left when they were young and then they came here and they're like, hey, this is what we believe in, or this is how you should be, or how life should go, and what you should strive for. But it's really like outdated. And when I've gotten back home, I've been so surprised about like, okay, now I get it. It's just their programming, but it's really like not relevant anymore. And then you get to this point where you realize the responsibility is on you to actually figure out what that balance looks like. And it can be really heavy. And like you said, Alia, part of what's part of that is also a lot of grieving, but figuring out the balance of like, holding on to the parts of your culture and your identity that add value, and then also accepting that you have you're influenced by your environment, right? And I think that's very clear for me, but also like you're saying, how for you, while you're still like in Nigeria, you're making that journey. Doesn't necessarily have to be just for us as children of immigrants, but just that as time moves on, we also get to write our own chapters and move with the times. And like, yeah, I think that's really important.
Yes, this conversation that you all are having is bringing to mind this concept of, and this is something I'm just learning about, the concept of healing your inner child, and how so many of us have just grown up believing that the culture that we have when it comes to relationships and the toxicity that we have witnessed in our households or in the surrounding community, that is so normal that we felt that it was wrong, but no one was verbalizing and saying, hey, that isn't correct. So we didn't know that we could speak out or speak up. Or if we did speak up, we were silenced. And so I think a lot of times we are still sort of, when we encounter those situations where it is safe to speak up, where it is safe to share your story, your inner child may come out or be triggered, and you may not feel, you may respond in the same way you would have responded when you were 8 or 9 years old. And, that was really powerful to understand that I can sort of calm myself and sort of talk to myself in this very nurturing way when those feelings come up. And when that anxiety comes up, I don't have to run from it and say, oh, here I go again, feeling small or feeling like I have to go hide. I know why I'm probably having this response, and I can journal about it, or I can talk to my therapist about it, and do some sort of activity to sort of push myself out there so that I can start to support that growth. And also understanding that takes a lot of time as well to heal that. And that healing, I don't know if I'll ever arrive at healed, but it's an ongoing healing. It's an ongoing journey, and sort of allowing myself to embrace that, like all of you have said about allowing your journey to just unfold in the time it's supposed to unfold, has put less pressure on myself when I do have those moments and none of the tools that I have are working in the moment. And it's just like, you know what, let me just allow myself to just be human. And it's okay today that I wasn't able to push past this, but maybe tomorrow. So yes, thank you all for sharing such great feedback on that question. I also wanted to talk about finances and how they impact mental health. And how have you been able to manage your financial goals while prioritizing your health?
I just have a quick note that I want to add on this is that, so I experienced burnout like 5 years ago, right? And then I realized at that point that everything I was doing wasn't working for me. So I actually took a year off work, which was like really, a big financial commitment to say, hey, I'm going to go from this like high level corporate role to like not working for a year, but that's what I needed to do. But then I also understand that I was like very privileged to do that. Like I had like enough money to do that, enough money to put myself through therapy and things like this. But it has really changed my outlook on what I want to do with my money, essentially, really. So the space that I'm at today is really that I use, like, I'm obviously still in a corporate job. I run my own business as a life coach, but the money, I use it specifically to be able to create space for myself. So after my burnout, like my well-being became like my top goal. And what I struggle with, and I'm sure a lot of people do, is overwhelm. There's just like not enough hours in the day. So for me, it's just like to have that, and I've done it twice now in the last 5 years. I've taken like 2 gap years where it's just like, I come first, like if I'm not well. But I understand that that's like a privilege that not everybody get to have. But it's been really important for me to use my money in a way that actually helps me right here and right now, whether that's therapy, taking time out, having like enough, money to get a personal trainer, eat the type of foods that I want. But at the same time, we created Airy Wellbeing as a way of understanding not everybody has the opportunity of doing this, right? So like everything that we do is free, community events, like podcasts, just pushing out resources to the community, because I really believe that whether, if you're committed to healing or improving your mental health, you can do it. There are so many free tools out there. There's so many people that you can talk to. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to like work with practitioners on this level. There are a lot of tools available, and I love to see that even like this event is free today, right? We're putting out resources for people to be able to start these journeys, whether whether it's free or paid for. I think that's a really important community consideration.
Yeah, I totally hear you, what you were saying about burnout as well. I feel like this year in particular has been a real journey for me in terms of understanding that. And I think that, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that, for me as an Egyptian woman, like my mom never really worked. Like none of the women in my life were ever particularly like ambitious or ever particularly kind of outside of the norms of like being, a housewife, which obviously is a thing in itself. But I think as of a young age, I was very much like, that's never going to be me. Like I really wanted to have this like big life and, work really hard and make things for myself. And it felt so important. It felt like, oh my God, I have to do this. Also because for like my grandmother who never could, and like I had this sort of burden of that. And a conversation that I've been having with my therapist a lot recently is like, why do you find your worth in your work? And I'm like, whoa, that's a huge question. But that's definitely something that I've been feeling this year, especially as I live alone. So I've just been at home for a year by myself basically, and I've thrown myself into work, and I'm like launching projects and I'm doing all this stuff, and I love it and it's great. But I think I'm also starting to realize like, okay, that's not everything. And like, where are my friends? Like it's really important to have like a well-balanced life. So that's, a journey that I'm still on. But I think that it can be very difficult when we feel the pressures of sort of, I definitely feel like I'm sort of doing this on behalf of my whole lineage of women. So that's like a heavy, heavy burden to carry.
Amazing. Like, oh my gosh, why do you feel like your worth is attached to your work? I'm just going to go away with that and think about that for the rest of my life, because I want to touch on two parts of my life that I got this realization with regards, finances and work, and, the impact on my mental health. The first was when, right now people know me for my work with regards to mental health, but people don't know, just barely 7 years ago, 6-7 years ago, I was an investment banker, and I was really deep into the industry. And that was about the time that I had my mental breakdown. And shortly after, I got diagnosed bipolar and PTSD. And, I had a near suicide attempt, and, I left everything. Like, I literally just hands up. I just left, no plan, nothing. I just quit. And, and that was really hard for a lot of people, especially in my family. Like, okay, just hold on and just like keep working. Let's be making plans. I'm like, you know what? I don't have luxury of plans right now. Like, I just don't. I just don't. And I think, for me at that time, it gave me a very strong realization that, it doesn't matter. A lot of it will not matter when your mental health is on the line in a dire situation. Like, I could have sworn in my life that no matter what it is, at least you're just like, okay, take a few days off. I'm like, no way. I don't even want to take a few days off. I don't want it. So that was one realization. I think the second one has been recurring year in, year out between 2019 and now, which is where I have had to confront the idea of why we work the way we work, and if that way that we work is actually working for us. And I continue to really struggle with it because, again, for me, and I've had this come up in past relationships where they say, you know what, your mood and everything is dependent on how your work is going. If your work is not going well, you're not going well. Like, if something is going on at work, you're just going to be moody all day, every day. And I'm like, no, that's not true. I leave my work behind. And they're like, no, you don't. So for me, it's hard because when you're challenging a lot of things, and like what Alia said, it feels like it's not just for me, it's for every other woman who doesn't have their voices heard. It feels like I'm living for my mother and her mother and all the other women who, could not particularly forge their own paths and things like that. So it feels like an incredible responsibility, right? But then again, it's also that this idea that we have to work so hard and you have to burn out in order for you to validate that your work is important. It's also this white knight syndrome, this savior mentality that, I have to carry the burden. If I don't do it, then nobody's going to do it. I'm the one that needs to save all these people from all the things that they are going through in the world. And if I don't do it, then imagine what's going to happen. And sometimes I have to, like, I have a friend that'll question me, like, really, I don't think you're that important. Like, calm down. And I'm like, what? But really, I think at the crux of it is, those two parts. The part where you feel like you're the savior, you have to carry the burden, and the other part where we've been conditioned to work a certain way. Our work culture is inherently toxic. It makes us feel like work and us are one and the same. And so whatever you do, you have to work long hours. You have to work hard in the true sense of the word. And then, you just have to keep doing that all the years of your life in order for you to get the sense of fulfillment. And, more and more, I'm finding more research and more literature that is pointing to the fact that, a good part of, doing good work is doing deep work and doing it for such a long time that perhaps, you can be mentally healthy whilst you're doing that. So I'm constantly having to be at that place. And right now, right before we started, I was telling the team that, I'm on a 4 months break now because I have to. I didn't have to get to the point where I needed to take a 4 month break. If I was just pacing myself over a period of time, maybe I could work longer every single day. I could go on longer than even being here. So I think, for every single person, we have to start rethinking work. And if the traditional idea of work is really working for us, this idea that you have to work early morning to late at night every single day, and on weekends you can't even rest because your mind is thinking of work. And then, even if you try to rest and play, you're guilty because, oh my gosh, there's work to do. And all of that just keeps going on and on and on. And I think it's we have to start redefining what that looks like. Really, I don't have all the answers, but it's something that I'm consistently tweaking within the organization as well, my organization as well. I'm not answering any mails after this time, and I suggest that you don't as well. Like, go to bed and go and spend time with your family. Oh, it's public holiday, guys. Like, I don't know why you're sending me a mail because I'm not going to answer it. So I put up all my notifications. Don't send me anything because I'm not going to get it. So you do the same. I think we need to start drawing a fine line, and it's going to really seem tough. But I think at this point, maybe our lives are really dependent on it.
Yes, I am exactly where you are. I always say, as a early stage founder, I have no personal financial goals. because we don't have any money. Because it was not the fortuitous journey that I chose in terms of it being financially advantageous for where I was in my life. But what I did know is that I didn't want to work in an environment that I worked 10 days a week and every hour of the week, and wanted to prioritize my mental health. And so in doing that, when making the decision that, okay, this is not going to be a path where I'm going to be making, a wild salary and have all the perks. So to swap that out, I'm going to prioritize my mental health and embed it into the work culture in which I'm building. And so as to what you're talking about, we have a 4-day week. Every day we have an hour off from Slack where we're not allowed to talk to one another so that we can reclaim that time for ourselves. We have mental health days every quarter. We have an on-site practitioner for our team. I mean, we're really like, okay, if we're not going to be rich, how can we be rich in life and in terms of our time and in terms of our mental health? If we're giving our all to this company and to create this really impassioned community that centers our identity, how can we show up and do that every day? We deal in the work of grief and trauma. We deal in the work of healing. It's hard. It's tough. We have to. I'm in these kinds of conversations, creating space for people where they are vulnerable, which is amazing. But I'm sitting there like, oh no, we have to solve a lot of collective, like systemic issues to heal what's happening in this country and in this world. And because of that, I also say, if I have 3 of those meetings a day, I'm offline for the rest of the day. And that's just a company-wide policy. We have to take care of ourselves or else we will feel burned out. We will have to take a year off, 4 months off. Instead of doing that, is there a way or a solution in which, one can have daily practices and rituals that don't allow for it? And, I don't know if it's working. We've only been doing it for about 6 months. I don't have like a white paper I can show to be like, look, I told you I was right, even though I'm saying it in my head. But I think in terms of financial goals, I've made the decision to not have my goals be financially driven, and instead to prioritize, my sleep. I'm all about naps. That's secretly why the time off is 2 to 3. That's like prime. I'm tired. I've had lunch. Couldn't really go for an hour-long nap. I'll just bake it into the whole way that the company works, and it's going well for me. But yeah, I think it's important to prioritize you as much as possible, because like we've all said in many different ways, if we don't feel good, the work's not getting done anyway.
I love all of that, Naj. And for me, in going back to the corporate world, I actually picked roles with lesser responsibility. And in my latest role, actually, I picked a role that was actually lesser pay. And I think when we think about these things, lesser pay, but I have more time. So what's most valuable, right? And I think we all, like you said also, how we need to think about how do we define work? We actually have the opportunity to really look at it. Is it ego driven? Why do I want to be on this level? And just really bring all of these things into our consciousness and really think about them. What does it actually mean? So for me, I know I would rather have lesser salary, but more time. What do I do with that time? I take care of myself. I invest in my own ideas or in my own business and so on. And I think that's just really important, because I feel that responsibility. I'm doing it for all of the women that came before me and all the women that will come from my bloodline, my lineage. It's very heavy, right? But at the same time, I need to exist here and now. And I don't know if we'll ever find balance between those two things, but we can try to the best of our ability and just remind ourselves that it doesn't matter if I'm trying to be super ambitious and do it for, and really push the needle on things. If I don't get to exist here and now and feel like I'm feet on the ground, embodied, and enjoying my life as well.
Oh my
One
God.
thing
Okay. Oh, okay. I mean, that just resonated so much with me. What if our goals weren't financially driven? Because I think, when you were brought up, and I don't even mean this, specifically to Maya. I think it's even a continent-wide thing, black, brown. When you're brought up in a certain type of, sort of a scarcity mindset, things are always going to finish. Things are running out. If I don't hurry, then I'm not going to get it. things are always running out, so you have to hurry up. And it drives you all the way to your financial goals. It's like there isn't going to be enough money, so I need to make it. I need to make it big, because who knows what's going to happen next year, and I'm not going to be able to make it, and then I'm going to be broke, and then all of those things start playing out, and before you know it, you're making decisions where you're supposed to be present here and now. You've robbed yourself of now to think of all the things, like your present value and all the future problems that could potentially happen and are not probable, actually. And then you just present value them into the now, and then now you don't have a now anymore. And then with regards to what Nat said, we practiced that in 2018, where we did a 4-hour workday and a 4-day week for most of the year, and it was unbelievable. So what we did was we used January and February to work the way we used to work, like just come very early, 8-9 o'clock, you start work, and you continue till about 5-6 o'clock. You have a working break of some sort, and then we did that. And the thing is that I did the spreadsheet where I would calculate, like productivity and the tasks that were done and all of that. So we had that for January and February, right? And then in March we started this, these 4-hour work days and things. And what I realized, surprisingly, and it almost seems counterintuitive or counterproductive, is that we were becoming even more productive with the less hours that we worked. Because it helped us to reshape, first off, what was the priority. It helped us to use better use of our time. And just the fact that you had free period coming, very early in the day was kind of like, it made people excited to actually do their work and to do it well. And then people were getting home early and getting more sleep, and they were happier coming back to work the next day. So again, it's really that we really need to interrogate what work feels like for all of us, and really realizing that there is a cost to it. There's a quote that I love so much that I don't know where I put the quote, but it's like, the cost of anything you do with life is the amount of life you have to pay for it. And oh my God, that I'm holding on to that. I just discovered the quote like 2 weeks ago or so, and I'm like, oh my days, it makes sense. I am paying with my mind. I am, oh my gosh, and that is a very, very, very heavy price to pay. And I just don't want to do it. I don't think anybody wants to do it, but that's the reality.
I want to echo what Hawa has shared. I'm seeing the same thing from us. I think that traditionally ambition and sort of scaling the ranks has been tied to putting in more hours, but we're seeing that it's actually not tight at all, that we're actually getting better, stronger work completed faster. The work that we've been able to turn around in the last 4 months, my investors are like, did you hire like 5 more people? And I'm like, no, everyone just sleeps more. Isn't that wild? When people are rested, they like can think and do stuff. So I always try to like, I feel like people think of it as like, it's vacation time, but really our team members feel like they can just show up and offer more. And like you mentioned, they're excited to be there. And it really requires sort of rethinking why we even have a 5-day work week to start, and sort of sitting with history and context and realizing that we don't have to do it that way. No one said that. We decided it was culture. Someone did. And now we're all just sort of going through the motions without saying like, wait, is there a better way? And then also there's just so much proof and research and, not anecdotal evidence that it is just a better way to work and create stuff.
I wanted to echo everything that was said about breakdowns and having no choice but to take a break because your body has said it's time. And I think we live in a very head-centered culture where it's like, I can talk my way out of this or talk my way through it, even when I feel tired or emotionally I feel broken. And at some point, it will show up in your body. And when that happens, for me over the summer, I had a complete total nervous breakdown to the point where I couldn't work for 2 months. I had a complete, I had to really start from the bottom and come back to my body because I had lost complete control over, my digestion and, my sleep patterns, and my heart was always beating fast. And, what I thought would be like one anxiety attack one day ended up being a series of physical or somatic issues or symptoms over the course of like several weeks. Going to the doctors, they're trying to give me tests and figure out what's wrong with you. And there's really no disease. It's just my body is tired. My spirit is tired. And so, prior to that, I had spent many years covering some very heavy topics, such as, police brutality, gendered violence, so on and so forth. And I never really considered, because in the culture in which I was working, no one talked about, hey, Nataleja, take time off, or hey, because you're covering such heavy topics, we're going to make sure you have a therapist. Like, that wasn't a conversation when I first started out in journalism in 2012. And so I see now, with everything that happened last year with this whole racial reckoning, and there's been more conversations about it. And I was able to take advantage of a Black journalist mental health fund that was started by, I don't know the exact organization that started it, but it was just amazing to see that support. And it seems like such a small thing to organize, because once people saw that, they were donating to the fund. But it's just like, wow, why didn't anyone consider this before people had breakdowns? And, so now I have decided to, continue working after restoring my, my health. But I'm taking my time, and I'm choosing to not have all of the financial, I guess, the goals that I had before have changed. Like Ruthie had said about, choosing a position that's a little bit less, heavy and burdensome, just so you can have that time. And I think now my whole viewpoint on work and mental health has completely changed. And, I'm just happy to be able to talk about it in this space as well. So yes, I just wanted to add that. We have maybe like 2 more minutes before the Q&A. So I wanted to give you all a chance to talk about a trigger warning. We've addressed a lot of heavy topics, and before I move on to this question, I just wanted to give you all an opportunity, if you need to step away from the chat for a second, because we will be asking about gender-based trauma. And what are some ways that, if you all have dealt with this in your work, or even personally, what are some ways that you have been able to cope or figure out coping mechanisms for this specific kind of trauma, for sexual or gender-based trauma?
Yeah, so I mean, I openly talk about my experience as a sexual violence, victim, survivor, depending on how you look at it. And it is definitely an experience that changes you forever. It is something that, and we know more and more, trauma-informed and trauma, evidence-based research is showing us that, trauma literally changes the physical structure of the brain, and how certain, parts of the brain respond to safety and relationships and love and, things like that. And so for me, I think, it's so hard to cope, because it's more like you're surviving, even if you try to cope, because one of the things that I always talk about when it comes to sexual or gender-based violence is that the trauma you're dealing with is what I'll capture in one word: stuck. It's like you're just stuck. You're stuck where it happened. And so your life is going around and passing through it every single day. And it's tough. It's really tough. Going to therapy has definitely helped. It helped particularly because I don't just want to like blow it out and just say therapy, but it helped particularly in helping me realize that it wasn't my fault. Because I believe that on a large scale, that is something that you have to deal with when you go through any form of sexual or gender-based violence, is that there's that feeling of, what did I do to bring this on myself? What is it? And I just tweeted about it a couple of days ago that, you have to ask, you tend to ask yourself, was it that I was naive? Was there a particular quality in me that made the person feel like I am a vulnerable prey? Like, I am the type of person that should be preyed upon. And so you first have to deal with that. It is really at the core of it, that it's not your fault. It happened to you, and you cannot take responsibility for the actions of somebody else. It was done to you. You did nothing to bring it upon yourself. You don't have to try to contextualize it or anything. No, It affected me a lot because, you know, on the psychological level, we're talking about, you know, how you feel and how you respond to security. I used to tell people then, like, I'll wake up in the middle of the night just to check that my door is locked a couple of times, you know, and at some point I stopped knowing how to drive because I used to drive, but I couldn't drive anymore because every time I saw the color of the car that, you know, the perpetrator drove at that time, I would literally just lose everything, like all my emotions and everything. That was really becoming very risky for me. So it does something to you. And so coming back to really validating the reality and really realizing that it's not your fault was something very powerful. I think also just being able to deal now with the fact that your brain functions differently is a reality that you have to come to terms with. You know, for me, it was realizing that, yes, there's going to be like my guards up. Before I could get into another relationship, it was really tough because, it was just always about, what are you trying to do? You can give me a good compliment and I'm thinking, where is this going? You know, what are you trying to do? You're trying to take advantage of me. And before you do anything, I sabotage. I'm just out of there, you know. So it's really hard to just say, oh, let's cope with it. It's more like survival, if we're being very honest, because it's like you're going to have to adjust to this new reality of the fact that something like this happened to you. And the consequences of it are far beyond what is on your conscious level that you can simply use willpower to surpass, you know. So therapy, very important. I think like every other sort of mental health condition, you're going to have to think about new ways to do old things, you know, new ways to build interpersonal relationships, new ways to be honest with yourself, new ways to be honest with people within your social circle, new ways to re-enter parts of your life that, you know, you thought you couldn't previously operate in. I don't even know if I'm really answering the question, but it is really heavy. And I think the sad part of it is that it is a relatable topic for many women on the African continent, that at some point in our lives, we have been touched by sexual violence, you know, and it's less about coping and it's more about survival, sadly.
Thank you so much for sharing, Hawa. I don't have any personal experience, but in my coaching practice, I noticed that mostly I coach Black and brown women, and it comes up a lot, but it surprises me every time because it's not the main topic, right? It just comes up as, it's an energy that just comes up and I pick up on it. And it's like, and it happens a lot in our communities and we need to be talking about it more, because my experience is just so many people are walking around with stories of things that happened to them when they were younger, and like they've never had the opportunity to express that in a safe space or even to integrate that experience somehow in terms of in you know, in a healing way. So yeah, I'm just glad that we're having the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have these conversations, and I think that there is, you know, victim blaming is so rife and, you know, across so many cultures. And I think the more we sort of debunk that, it's so important to do, because having to have that burden of what did I do, is that my fault, on top of this horrific thing that's happened, is just the last thing that anyone needs. And, you know, I think we've been having this conversation a lot over the last few months, in the UK, especially after the murder of Sarah Everard, who was walking home. And there was this huge outpouring of women coming forward saying, you know, I don't feel safe to walk home. I don't feel, everyone was coming forward with all of these experiences that literally every single woman in the world has had. And I think, again, going back to what we were talking earlier about the importance of community and of shared experiences, I think in seeing that this is like a systemic, you know, problem around the whole world, and that happens to everyone in one way or another, I think is just, it's nice to know, even if it's you know, horrific truth, but at least it's like, well, it's not just me. This is a bigger problem that the more we talk about, hopefully, the more we can kind of, yeah, debunk and hopefully be able to do something about. I don't know if I've said anything worthy, but
No, absolutely. I really do think you did say, very, very important things, especially the victim blaming. A lot of what you have to deal with is the shame that it happened to you. And it's perhaps one of the few things in life where, the victim is being blamed and all the burden of proof is placed on the victim. And it is such a heavy, heavy burden to carry that, why were you there? What did you wear? What did you do? What did you say? Why wasn't in that place? And the truth is you do that alone by yourself, not to now even talk about when you now finally decide that maybe you want to speak up or maybe you want to seek care and things like that. It's like you have to reconfront those things because now they're said back to you. And it's like, this is the reinforcement that I was looking for, right? And so it's really tough. And so a lot of the coping is really tied to the systemic shift. If this wasn't something that we were blamed for, it would take away a huge aspect of dealing with, first of dealing with the fact that it even happens, that it is perpetrated in our communities by people that we know closely, and the fact that you don't have to walk around in shame because it was done to you, so yeah.
I think the thing with shame as well is that it's so often weaponized. So in Egypt, in summer, there was this so-called Me Too movement that was happening in Egypt after this serial harasser did lots of things. And he basically utilized shame to get the women to not speak about it. So he would kind of be like, well, I've got this of you, so I'm going to share this unless you continue, etc., etc. And I think that just goes to show like why it's so important to debunk the shame, because it can literally be weaponized by the perpetrators to kind of further do what they're doing. So we need to debunk, like we need to get rid of this victim blaming. We need to get rid of the shame around this, because if we don't, and if we don't speak about these things, then it's even easier for it to continue to happen.
Okay, if no one has anything to add to that, thank you for chiming in on something that's can be really heavy to talk about. The silencing, the shame, the victim blaming is, something that I have personally experienced, but also in interviewing other people who have gone through that, they have echoed those same experiences as well. And so, for those who are watching, who have experienced that, knowing that you're not alone, and knowing, over the years, I have read a lot of books about, from the perspective of Black feminists, and, just sort of them navigating this topic has been really helpful for me in my journey, as well as through therapy as well. And just understanding that even though this is horrific, like Alia said, I'm not alone. There are people who have also gone through this as well, even if I'm not comfortable necessarily saying every detail or talking about it out loud. I can at least know for myself that, there's other people who have gone through it, and there are spaces to heal. And so I did want to talk about spaces to heal and other mental health resources that you all wanted to either shout out, or things that may be beneficial to the audience today, if you wanted to speak more on that.
I can start. My company. So Ethel's Club is a digital social and wellness space in which you can connect with other people through community, but we also have a variety of different healers, practitioners, and creators who bring different kinds of series, all centering your well-being in all of the ways that means. So we're not talking just wellness in terms of yoga and mental health, but financial health, nutrition, professional. It kind of runs the gamut. You can sign up to be a member, and we really just provide a space in which people can have these conversations. And because it's membership based, you see a lot of the same people, so you're able to sort of share space, like laterally across these different topics. So if you're interested, I'm always down to chat about it. My email is naj@ethelsclub.com if anyone has questions, and it's ethelsclub.com is the website.
I've actually experienced Ethel's Club. It's awesome. Like, yeah, you guys have so many like great things going on in that environment. So in general, I just want to say that if anyone wants to start the healing journey, there's so many free resources available, like literally like Google, like YouTube, on Instagram, and so on. There's so much. If you want to get started today, it's possible. Just try to seek out, people and communities just using the platforms that you're likely on already on a daily basis. We have a podcast called the Every Wellbeing Podcast, where we interview people from the community around their own experiences with mental health. We interview psychiatrists, psychologists, and so on. And it's specifically for Black and Brown people, children of immigrants. We wanted to create a really relatable experience. I have a coaching practice. If anybody's interested in one-on-one coaching as well, just contact me after this. And another thing that I think is interesting is just like free apps like Liberate and Insight Timer. Liberate is specifically for Black and Brown people. Insight Timer has like tons of practitioners that offer free meditations and kind of like mindfulness tools that you guys can use on a daily basis. So those are a couple of things that come to mind. But in general, the message is there's like tons of stuff out there. I think it's less so about like pinpointing the exact tool and more about giving yourself permission to start the journey.
I just had to write those two down. One thing, I know we've mentioned it a few times, but one thing that I found really helpful is journaling. So I've been doing this thing called the morning pages for the last few months, and that is Julia Cameron, who has this book called The Artist's Way. It's linked to that, but you could also just do the morning pages separately, and it's essentially free, like just writing, like whatever comes to mind. Basically, as soon as you wake up, you grab a book and you just like fill 3 pages with stream of consciousness. And I cannot tell you how many epiphanies I've had where I'm like, whoa, I did not realize that was happening inside me. And it's been really, really, really helpful in terms of connecting with my inner being, because I think that often we know the answers to our questions. We just haven't given ourselves the permission or the space to think about it. And I found that this morning pages has been such a game changer with that, because that's all you're doing is just you're giving yourself the space.
Yeah, I mean, just we have something very similar to what Naj spoke about. We have Safe Place Nigeria, and it's really a community as well. It started off as pop-up support groups, in different parts of Nigeria, and now, of course, because of the pandemic, we had to make it digital. We're accelerated by Facebook last year, but it's really an opportunity for mental health conscious people to do things, connect, utilize resources and tools in a way that you make mental health more of a lifestyle rather than this event that happens in bits and pieces across the year. So you connect with counselors, therapists, and people who share lived experience with you and just share experiences pretty much. Beside that, we also have a 24/7 toll-free helpline that serves the whole of Nigeria as well. So that is 0800 800 2000 for any Nigerians that may be listening. It is 0800 800 2000, and it's 24/7 and toll free.
Can I add something really quick? I feel like when I talk about Ethels Club, it feels like this very okay, are you ready to go on this very deep journey, which it can be. And there is this running joke on Twitter that if you go to an Ethels Club event, you'll definitely cry. But we do have a lot of lighthearted events as well, because we like to have things that are a place where you can heal and grieve and sort of get deep, but also find joy, feel empowered and supported as well. And so I don't do the best job of giving it the all-encompassing approach, but if you were to experience and even go to our website, we really try to make it feel like the journey doesn't have to be one note. So if there are folks who are maybe thinking well, I'm not maybe ready to start that journey, we offer other things as well. So then when you are, it's just a click away.
Great. And I wanted to add 2 resources that personally have helped me as well. Open Path Therapy, they have affordable therapists that are below market rate. So if you can't afford to pay the full price, these therapists have made themselves available to those who are economically in need. And then also the Loveland Foundation, which offers therapy grants for women of color. They paid for 4 of my sessions last year. And then this year they surprised me because they asked again if I still needed assistance. And so that was very helpful. So now we are going to go into question and answer, and we have a few questions from the audience. And the first one is, we often speak about mental health and illnesses as individual struggles, but how do larger societal structures impact mental health? For example, racism, capitalism, colonialism, etc.
I'd say that it impacts it a lot, right? Just look at like what we went through last year in terms of, the racial justice moment that happened in the world that was like broadcast real time, and everybody was, at home. So we really got to look at it, real time all over the world. But that's just a nugget of what Black and brown people go through on a daily basis, right? As we're like living and operating in these structures that aren't really optimized for us. And I think that I hosted a series of conversations. It was really, a community thing where for Black professionals actually during, I think it was like May, June of last year, just creating a safe space for other Black professionals that actually had to see what was going on, with George Floyd, and then go back to workplaces where nothing was acknowledged, right? And how does that impact your mental health, that you're supposed to show up for work like chirpy and just like business as usual, but it's not business as usual. Most of us are like dying on the inside, seeing this trauma and just being re-traumatized like all the time. So I'd say it impacts us a lot, but I'd also say on the flip side of that, it's created a lot of community. And for me specifically, it's helped that I've been able to heal, not just with Black people, with like some of my very good white friends. We've even been able to talk about some of this stuff in a very open and healing kind of way. So yes, it's a lot. And I think we carry the burden of this on a daily basis. But I feel like last year's event kind of pushed, for me, I would speak for myself, like really pushed me to speak more openly about these matters, like in all spaces. So to not kind of shrink, but bring more of myself, like talking about these structures on like LinkedIn and these issues on LinkedIn, which before was like a very scary thing for me. But I was like, hey, no, actually, this is the thing. And I stand by it like all day, every day. And we need to talk about it, and we need to bring it into these spaces too. So there's like that part. And then for me, there's also the part around finding healing and having that conversation also in my private spaces with friends from like all over, because it's a human issue at the end of the day.
I agree with everything Ruthie said. The only thing I'll add is I think it's important to not divorce the two. I think that everything is so intertwined with racism, with capitalism, with colonialism. And I think a lot of it is just naming it, right? When you are having these sort of larger or individual conversations around your own mental health, of understanding how it fits into the framework in which we all live. It's something I personally work on when I am sort of writing my journal of like, here are 10 things I don't like about myself, or whatever the theme is that day. It is usually and almost 100% rooted in a much larger cultural narrative that is outside of my hands. It's not something that I can't eradicate racism or capitalism, but it is why I was burned out before. It is why I don't feel safe walking into certain spaces. And I think understanding it as a truth, which I don't think anyone thinks it's not true, but I think understanding how it as a truth intertwines in with your personal struggles individually is important. And I think it helps to almost like situate it or sit with it. Again, not thinking it from potentially of a failure of your own, but we live inside a system, a very specific kind of system that is designed to keep things a certain way. And I think it's important to understand how those systems impact how you feel, what you think, and how you act and who you are.
I think for me, I just want to broaden it a little bit beyond, just racism, and how it's so important that when we're talking about mental health, we realize that, it is intricately connected with our social environment and everything that is going on. And whether it's racism or whether it is more broadly encompassing things like housing and poverty and, and education and healthcare. And and that's why more and more we're looking at mental health as a disability rights issue, because now we're realizing that it is so important that you cannot tell somebody that, oh, you live with this, okay, now you have to fix what it is that you're dealing with, because what is creating the person's disability or ability to to live a full life is really social. It's the fact that, in certain spaces I cannot function. In certain spaces, the rules are not built with me in mind. It's in that if I live independently, this is what happens. It's that if I have healthcare issues, this is not covered, and things like that. So it is the social setting that is disabling to people, and not necessarily what they have, because the environment hasn't particularly adjusted to my needs. And so it is so important that we continue to look at them, from that perspective, as against only from this biomedical perspective of something that needs to be treated and fixed and all of that, but really about how can you ensure that the environment is working to ensure that this person is enabled to actually, live a full life.
Great. Thanks for answering that question. And before we wrap up, we wanted to go around and have everyone say an affirmation. And so I'll give you a quick moment to.
I've got one adapted from this quote that I love, and I'll often write this in my morning pages, but I am a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time.
I love that. Mine is I am, and that's simply because I need to work on my, being present is like really important to me. So I am.
I feel like everybody's going really deep, and I'm like, oh shit. And it's funny because I have like this playlist of lots of affirmations, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, which one? So I have this one that I see every morning. I just scribbled on a piece of paper right beside my bed. So when I wake up, it says, thank you for the good news that's coming to me today. And it's just there every day, every morning. Thank you for the good news that's coming to me today. So, yeah.
I think one for me is a lot, well, I'd say simpler, but I am not alone. I'm very much a lone wolf. I can do it. I don't need help. I got this. And I am working through what it means to lean on other people, to ask for help, to not be solitary in literally everything that I do. And I think saying it in that way, I am not alone, isn't me asking for help, but it's a reminder that if I do want to seek it out, it's available in there for me.
My affirmation, I'm looking at a few that I have written. I would say, let this be a day full of goodness, beauty, levity, and expansion. So these are the things I hope to see every day, especially with all that's going on in the world. I definitely lose sight sometimes of the little details, like the sun being out and the fact that I can just go for a walk and feel the air on my skin. It may sound cheesy, but it's really important to do that every day. It does help my mood. So, yep, that's mine. So thank you all for sharing so many amazing experiences about mental health and work-life balance, and how it impacts our communities. I hope that this was very helpful to those who were watching. Before we log off, I just want to remind everyone that there is one more event left in the summit focusing on sexual health and relationships. So how are you all feeling now that you got to speak these things?
Yeah, really good, actually.
Good.
I feel like I'm one of the biggest beneficiaries of this session, actually. It just feels like everyone is talking to me, and I'm like, oh, my baby. Oh, sure, that makes sense. Yeah, So yeah, this has been perhaps very therapeutic. I don't want to say therapy, but very therapeutic for me.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. This felt very therapeutic. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye.
There's this element that you might need to perform your culture and your identity just in order to stand out.
My whole career, I've been told to speak Kiswahili, and that's what's going to make me Kenyan. Learning to speak Kiswahili in Nairobi, is pretty difficult. So I haven't really gotten to that point, but I still would. I had a disdain for it before because I was like, that's not what makes you Kenyan. But now I'm like, it's actually a beautiful language. If I could ever put Kiswahili into my music, I'd want to do it authentically, but I'm not 100% sure that that's what would make me African. So I'm still figuring that out.
Big tune.